Good morning, dear fathers and brothers. It's my hope that all of us are doing well and um, not forgetting our assignment as far as phenomenology is concerned. You will remember we made mention of Richard Rorty, who is of the opinion that phenomenology simply can be defined as deviations from Edmund Husserl. And I tried to make a synopsis the last time we had a discussion to help to situate us. So I'm just kind of reminding us not to forget as we are progressing. There is this book which we shared at the beginning, Introduction to Phenomenology by Demott Moran. That's a document published in 2000, and you can clearly see the trend of thought from that work. Beginning from Husserl, you see the contributions of the other phenomenologies that are nothing, to say the least, but deviations from the trend taken by Husserl. So that said, I would like to welcome all of you to our series for today, and basically we're looking at the background to Husserl's phenomenology. Of course, if you are looking at our course outline, you will see clearly there. That's the second step which we are taking to consider the background to Husserl's phenomenology. And there are basically 3 points. If you look at that outline very well, there are basically 3 points which we need to consider. The first one is the influence of the 17th century. The second is the contributions of Frank Brentano, and then the third is contributions of the 17th century philosopher René Descartes. So at the end of this series, what you need to be able to do is to maybe to just say how the 17th century contributed to the development of Husserl's phenomenology. Say how um, Frank Brentano was relevant to the evolution of phenomenology, and then René Descartes. I think if we're able to say this, we're able to discuss this, we're able to consider this, then the objective for this series must have been attained. Now, when we talk about the 17th century, what comes to mind immediately is the era of epistemology. I like to be more specific on that. The age of epistemology. It is the age of reason. 17th century has often been described as the age of reason. It is the age as well of science, particularly modern science. Of course, when you look at the works of René Descartes and then uh, Francis Bacon, Francis Bacon, and the document that is coming to my mind is the New Atlantis, which is available online. If you check this, you see clearly the agenda of modern science defined by these two pertinent philosophers. That's Descartes and Francis Bacon. So the 17th century is the age of epistemology, is the age of reason as against faith. You remember that the medieval period, the medieval era capitalized a lot on faith. The medieval era was the period in which faith was the light of the world. Faith in the medieval age was the light of the world. And then there is this Renaissance, the period of intellectual reawakening, serving as that's the advocate of this the 17th century, the age of epistemology. And one of the things that we can recall as far as the Renaissance is concerned is that people started walking away from the dictates of faith. I remember particularly this philosopher called Voltaire, who is of the opinion that we should not allow people to think for us. We should dare to think for yourself. Not allowing people to think for us was like saying that, hey, you don't have to allow the church to think for you. Because you can recall that within the medieval era, the church And to be more precise, the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church, was like the light of the world. The Roman Catholic Church was, if we were borrowing from Protagoras, the sophist, was like the measure of all things, of things that are, that they are, of those that are not, that they are not. So when we talk about the 17th century being the age of reason, we simply talk about the switch or the swing over from that era of faith dominating to the era where reason dominated, where what was right was what we were able to arrive at from reason, what was wrong was what we were able to arrive at from reason. And then no one had the monopoly of reason. Everybody is capable of reasoning for himself and for herself. So it was the age of reason. It was the age as well of the era of science. That's the 17th century. So what is pertinent here is that this period capitalized a lot on the object of knowledge. What is the object of our knowledge? So emphasis was on the object of studies, what we're going to refer to here as the age of objectivity. So emphasis was laid more on the object to the detriment of the subject. So we can say here that philosophy departed from the ancient consideration, because the ancient approach to philosophy was holistic. That is the study of subject-object. That is why you can remember very well, beginning from the pre-Socratics, investigating into the origin of the universe. And then the sophists brought in another novelty in this, to study man. They brought philosophy, they took philosophy from the attempt to understand the universe to the study of man and his cultures, man and his civilization, man and his customs. So we can say that ancient philosophy was holistic in the sense that it gave attention to the object as well as to the subject. And we can remember very well Socrates. Socrates is known, amongst other things, in his epistemology for advocating for the most important knowledge, most important of all the knowledge, which to Socrates is knowledge of the self. That's what he said, man, know thyself. So the 17th century departed from this approach, and we can say that this period was reductionist in its approach. Reductionist how? Because it undermined the object. I beg your pardon, it undermined the subject and paid a lot of attention in understanding the object of our knowledge. So it is the period that resulted to the impoverishment of philosophy. How was philosophy impoverished? Because it left from its dual nature, that is the object-subject nature, and then now capitalize just on the object of our knowledge. So phenomenology therefore developed from an attempt to revive this subjective, the attempt to resurrect, the attempt to give focus on the subjective that has been undermined in the 17th century. So that is the reason why Martin Buber is of the opinion that the most important discipline that we must get into seriously is that of philosophical anthropology. And he says that we should forget about the anthropology that studies human heads or tribes or cultures, but we must capitalize on philosophical anthropology that studies man himself in the totality of his being. That is like saying that we need to come back to the self, to study the self. Why? Because sometimes the subject that studies the object remains very ignorant we can have tremendous knowledge about the objects of our study and very limited knowledge about ourselves that study those objects. And therefore, when we talk about the 17th century, what is very evident and should be coming to the forefront of our minds is that it is the age of objectivity. It was the era of objectivity, and I'm using objectivity here in the sense of object-centrism, if you want. That's focusing more on the object to the detriment of the subject that studies those objects. And therefore, um, phenomenology cropped up in an attempt to reverse this trend, in an attempt to revive the subjective. That is how the 17th century influenced the development of Husserl's phenomenology. Then the second person, or the second approach or aspect that we need to look or to take into consideration is, as you can see clearly on your course outline, is the influence of Frank Brentano. Edmund Husserl, who is considered as the father of phenomenology, says that he acknowledges that phenomenology began with Frank Brentano. Phenomenology to Husserl started not with him, but with Frank Brentano. So, what is it about Frank Brentano that causes Husserl to give him such credit? What did Frank Brentano do to receive such credit? There are two aspects. One, descriptive psychology. His focus on descriptive psychology. And then point number two, his emphasis on one of the key principles, or what has come to be considered as a key principle or key concept, if you want, in phenomenology, which is the aspect of intentionality. So these are the two: descriptive psychology and intentionality. To begin with, point number one, descriptive psychology. What is descriptive psychology? Simply from Frank Brentano's dimension, it is the study of psychical experiences. It is the study of reality, intramentum. That's to say, reality in the mind. Reality in the mind. And Brentano says that there are three aspects which can be considered from this point of view. The first one, which he considers, is presentation, then judgment, and the phenomena of love and hate. Now, it's like maybe borrowing from logic to talk about the operations of the mind. That's simple apprehension, judgment, and reasoning. Simple apprehension from the logic perspective is the formation of ideas in the mind. Judging is the ability for the mind to recognize the various ideas that are formed in the mind. When the mind comes into contact with something, the mind is aware of something. What thing? I can say, for instance, a red car. That's judgment. And then we have reasoning, the ability to be able to relate one judgment to another. This is a red car. This red car is beautiful. This red car is attractive. This red car is owned by Mr. John Paul Quine. The driver of this red car is Eric Ekani. So this reasoning from the logician's perspective. We call this the operations of the mind. Then Brentano got his own perspective, which we're referring to as descriptive psychology, from three perspectives. That's presentation. Presentation is when the mind is conscious of something. When the mind is conscious of something, then we can talk about presentation. The awareness that the mind has of something, we can talk about presentation. Then we can go ahead to ask, presentation of what? What are you aware of? What are you conscious of? Then it will be that judgment now that we have. Then the last is the phenomena of love and hate, which Frank Brentano says that when we are aware of something, we quite often consciously or unconsciously have this attitude: I like it, I don't like it. This is a red apple. Ah, I'm conscious of it. That's a red apple. I like red apples. I don't like red apples. So this is what he talks about. And when he says that phenomenology that phenomenology started with Frank Brentano, Husserl is of the opinion that the study of consciousness started with Brentano. So Brentano is important in the development of phenomenology, of Husserl's phenomenology, from this initial study of consciousness, which Husserl got to develop his phenomenology. That is the more reason why Husserl's phenomenology has been defined as the study of consciousness, as experience from the first person point of view, by each person from the first person. That's what we mean by that, from the first person point of view. That is that about descriptive psychology. Don't forget that. The study of psychical experiences, and these are categorized into three: presentation, judgment, and then the phenomena of love and hate. Important in phenomenology because it serves as the starting point of the study of consciousness, which is very, very central in Husserl's phenomenology. Of course, if you go back to the last discussion that we had, you discover that we define Husserl's phenomenology as the phenomenology of consciousness. The phenomenology of consciousness. And we went ahead citing Paul Ricoeur to say that other phenomenologies deviated or departed from this. And that is why Ricoeur considers phenomenology as deviations from Husserl. You know, Heidegger, to begin with, takes phenomenology from the abstract. That's the study of consciousness that Husserl capitalizes on. Heidegger takes it to design. You say, well, I'm no longer studying consciousness, but I want to study that being called design, in which reality is constituted. Husserl capitalized on consciousness, where reality is constituted. Heidegger capitalized on that being in its totality, in which reality is constituted. And we have other philosophers like Emmanuel Levinas, for instance, taking phenomenology to the dimension of alterity. Jean-Paul Sartre to the dimension of passionate description. Hannah Arendt to the dimension of the public sphere. We have Derrida. Derrida takes it to deconstruction. Then we have Gadamer. Gadamer takes it to hermeneutics, interpretation. So you see various varieties, various dimensions that are being given to phenomenology to justify Paul Ricoeur's thesis that phenomenology is nothing but deviations from Husserl. So that's that about descriptive psychology. Then there is this aspect. The second aspect is the dimension of intentionality. Intentionality, as I said before, is a central concept in phenomenology, and that is the subject-object mental relationship. Mental relationship is not a physical kind of relationship. It is subject-object, the mental relationship. That is presentation. If you take presentation, that's the various stages of what we're referring to as descriptive psychology, as understood by Frank Brentano. If you look at the various stages, the first stage is presentation. Presentation is a presentation of something. So to present is to present something. To think is to think something. To speak is to speak something. So that subject-object relationship is simply known in phenomenology as intentionality. And this is a very important aspect in phenomenology, because phenomenology attempted to revive the subjective, not to undermine the objective, but to consider the subject and object relationship, subject-object relationship. And Husserl is at the forefront here, and Husserl looks at it from the dimension of consciousness, the philosophy of consciousness, the phenomenology of consciousness. And we are indicating here that consciousness, it is, of course, it is a subject that is conscious, but then the object of that consciousness, the subject is conscious of something. What thing? It can be anything, so it becomes simply the object. That is the dimension that we're looking at it from there. So you have these two concepts, object subject relationship, which are very pertinent. Of course, it will be a fallacy to attempt, as we said in the first aspect, that is the influence of the 17th century. It will be a fallacy to try to attempt to revive the subjective by suppressing the objective. No, but phenomenology here studies this dimension. So it gives light, it focuses on the subject as well as the object. Then, leaving Brentano, and before leaving Brentano, please let me just remind ourselves again that when Husserl says that phenomenology began with Frank Brentano, it is because of those two perspectives which we have considered. Brentano's efforts on descriptive psychology, and then the fact that he capitalized on the concept of intentionality, which is at the heart of phenomenology. Then the third aspect, or the third dimension here, we're looking at the contributions of René Descartes to the development of Husserl's phenomenology. And there are 3 points, there are 3 aspects. Descartes is important from 3 perspectives. To begin with, Edmond Husserl acknowledges René Descartes by saying that phenomenology must honor Descartes as its genuine patriot. Phenomenology, as Husserl says, must give some credit to Descartes, must honor Descartes as its genuine patriot. Why did Husserl say this? Because of Descartes' tremendous contribution, Descartes' important contribution to the development of phenomenology. And there are 3 dimensions, there are 3 aspects. The first one is the starting point of Descartes' philosophy. The second is Descartes' methodic doubt. And then the third is the aspect of intentionality. So you remember, that's the first point, starting point of Descartes' philosophy. You remember that Descartes' philosophical project, Descartes' philosophical mission is to build philosophy on a solid foundation, to build philosophy on a mathematical foundation, so that the contentions of philosophy, like those of mathematics, should not be doubted. That's what Descartes sets out to attain, that he can give philosophy some mathematical base, so that the truths of philosophy, like those of mathematics, should have some certainty, should be clear and distinct, which are concepts that Descartes is well known for. So, how did he get to this? How did he get to this starting point? What is the starting point of his philosophy? So, when he defined this mission of giving philosophy a mathematical base, Descartes set out to doubt everything. And he actually doubted everything. And when he doubted everything, he arrived at something that could not be doubted. That's the truth of the I. the truth of the cogito and the I. He said, okay, I can doubt everything, but I cannot doubt that I am doubting. Even if I do doubt that I am doubting, then I cannot even doubt my existence, because if I doubt, I am. That's the foundation of the cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am, therefore I am. So truth to Descartes is found in the very act of doubting. So when he doubted, he arrived at truth that cannot be doubted. And that truth is the truth of his existence. And since his project was to build philosophy on a foundation that cannot be doubted, the I served now as the starting point of Descartes' philosophy. And you will remember that, as we said initially, that phenomenology developed from efforts to revive the I, the subject. So Descartes is pertinent, Descartes is important in giving phenomenology that soft ground, in preparing the ground. Descartes can be considered, if we were to borrow from religious, from the Judeo-Christian Bible, Descartes could be considered as a harbinger. He could be considered as a John the Baptist of phenomenology. John the Baptist because he announces, he prepares the way for Husserl. He prepares the way for Husserl. How? From the starting point of his philosophy, which is the I that thinks. The I that thinks. Man to Descartes is a thinking thing. Man is the I that thinks. So that is the first. The second contribution of Descartes, which cannot be taken for granted as well, is the methodic doubt. When Descartes defined his objective, Descartes went ahead to define his method. To say, well, if we need to get to truth which cannot be doubted, then we need a path. We need to take a path. And he called that path the methodic doubt. The methodic doubt is doubt which is a method. The methodic doubt is not the doubt which is aimless, but it is the doubt in order to. It is doubt in order to be able to get knowledge. So it is the path to knowledge. And Descartes resolved to doubt everything that could possibly be doubted, so that he could come to that which can no longer be doubted. And then when he arrives at that which can no longer be doubted, he built his epistemological edifice on that foundation. So when Husserl says to, as he says in his logical investigation, back to things themselves, back to the things themselves, back to the nature of reality itself, back to the substance of reality itself, back to the essence of reality itself, Husserl was inspired by René Descartes to look for a method that could be taken to get to the heart of reality. And that method is the phenomenological method. The phenomenological method. We're going to see this, the method of bracketing, the epoche. We're going to see this. And what is of interest to us is that this base was prepared by René Descartes. And that is perhaps one of the reasons why Husserl tells us that phenomenology must honor Descartes as its genuine patron. The last but not the least, as far as René Descartes is concerned, is the aspect of intentionality. The aspect of intentionality. We are all aware that Descartes doubted everything, and then Even the truth of his own existence, he doubted. And then he came to, when he doubted, he arrived at some truth. One of the truths that cropped up from the methodic doubt is the truth of the cogito. Cogito ergo sum. Cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. I think, therefore I am. And Husserl criticized Descartes. Husserl says that the Cartesian cogito ergo sum is not radical. It's not radical. I think. What do you think? I think. He said that Descartes presumed this. And it is this presumption that further impoverished the object as well. I think. Emphasis is on the subject. I think. The I that thinks. And phenomenology, as we said, attempts to revive the subject. It is as well focusing on the object. That is the base of intentionality. So Descartes was not radical by just saying that I think, therefore I am. And that is why Husserl takes a more radical approach. Being influenced by Descartes, he takes a more radical approach. The approach of the ego cogitatum. Ego cogito cogitatum. That is, I think something. I think something. Descartes simply just said, I think, therefore I am. And Husserl says, I think something. Because to think is to think something. So that is a kind of fortified intentionality influenced by René Descartes. So it is from this perspective that we can understand the three perspectives which we have taken, that we can understand the background to Husserl's phenomenology, the influence of the 17th century, the era that had impoverished philosophy, and Husserl phenomenology came in an attempt to revive the subjective. And then we have Frank Brentano as laying the base for the philosophy of consciousness. That's the phenomenology of consciousness that Husserl is well known for. Then Descartes' starting point, his methodic doubt and intentionality are all ingredients that serve as building rocks to Husserl's phenomenology. So we can consider the 17th century, Frank Brentano and René Descartes as call it harbingers, forerunners of phenomenology. Thank you very much for your kind attention, and please don't forget that if there are difficulties, you can always get back to me so that we can clarify when you have time. I hope that at least you have been able to understand the key issues which we have raised in that point number 2, the background to Husserl's phenomenology. Thank you very much.